the brokenness of our parents' lives affect us. The brokenness of their lives affect our lives. So, my mom, whom, if you're in our church family, you know that she passed away Christmas time 2020 in her mid-80s after a kind of a bout with a couple of forms of cancer, actually. My mom was born into extreme poverty in the middle of the Depression of the 1930s out in the sand dunes of West Texas. In fact, as a very small girl, her family lived in like a sharecropper's house, a tiny little wooden structure that you could see between the boards, and when the wind blew, the sand blew into the house. She had an older sister. As preschoolers, she had an older sister who died of rheumatic fever as just a young toddler because the family could neither afford or get to a doctor. And so my mom's mom, my grandmother, in total despair, attempted suicide. Not once, but multiple times. And as a result, my grandmother spent 2 full years in a mental hospital in the early 1940s in a rural area. Can you imagine what that experience might have been? All during the formative years of my mom's childhood. And so look, her mother's brokenness deeply affected her life. And my mom's woundedness and brokenness affected my heart and my life. And a part of my journey, in fact, a part of my journey with Christ has been to let Christ for Him to take on the burdens of my grief and my sorrows. And that is a part of my story. He's done that. I have a friend, his name is Robbie. When Robbie's dad was a young teenager, a tragic thing happened. He accidentally killed a friend. He was showing a new shotgun. They were looking at a brand new shotgun, and as a result of his careless action, he actually shot and killed his very best friend. And that sorrow and grief and guilt engulfed him. It absolutely destroyed him. And his only remedy, the only remedy that he could turn to, the only remedy that he thought would be helpful to him was to numb it, to numb the pain. And he did that with alcohol. And then he became dependent on the alcohol. And then that began to ruin his ability to keep a job. And then it destroyed his marriage. And then it deeply damaged his relationship with his son, my friend, Robbie. And so his sorrows, his griefs, his regrets deeply affected my friend Robbie. Later in his dad's life, Robbie had over and over described to him, but late in his life, as Robbie was describing again to his dad, what Christ had done in his own life, his dad turned and he placed his faith in Christ. He himself put his faith in Christ, and he came to, over a period of time, understand, recognize the forgiveness that Christ had put in his life, but then supernaturally, he wasn't doing this. It's just that Christ began to take the burden of his grief and his sorrow and his regret, began to take it onto himself, and he was becoming free from it. And he experienced Christ taking the burden onto himself, and he began experiencing freedom for the very first time from the guilt of a careless act as a teenager many years before. And as a result of that, then the grip of the alcohol began to fade away in his life. And Christ bore his sorrow. Christ shouldered his guilt and grief and sorrow. It is a supernatural part of the process. Now look, I am not describing here something cathartic. I had a burden, I shared it with somebody else, and they showed sympathy to me, and I feel better. Not that. I'm describing the power of coming into a faith relationship with God through Christ, through what He was doing on the cross, where Christ takes my grief, He takes my sorrow onto Himself. It is a supernatural exchange that God Himself does. And then inside my heart and my mind and my emotions, they begin to heal from the inside out. That is the atonement, and that is what Christ was doing on the cross. He bore our griefs, and He carried our sorrows. The point of verse 4 is not that Jesus had sympathy for my pain, and that makes me feel better. The point of verse 4 is that He has borne it. He has carried it. And the ultimate effect is that I am put back together internally.